So to get us started today, I just want to let you know who Choose to Page is and what we do. So Choose to Page does all things business attraction, retention, and growth at the county level. So we do work with all the municipalities in DuPage County. We support them for that business attraction, but we also have some other initiatives that I want to make sure to let you know about. So we have Connect DuPage, and this was through DuPage County funding. We're able to launch this in 2023. This is a business-to-business collaboration connection. We recognized during COVID supplier chain challenges, and to purchase local could benefit the economy. So we created a registration, Connect to Page supplier registration, and then about I'm going to say about 4 months ago, we released the directory publicly. So you can go on our Connect to Page website, you can register your business, and then you can also search to find what you need to purchase, keep the money local as possible to benefit our economy. That is the goal. We do run educational events, and those are ongoing all throughout the year. We started with certification for a diverse population, women-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned, physically disabled-owned small business, but then we went into how to do business with. And so we've had Argonne and Fermilab and Illinois Tollway. We will continue to run those. So please watch our website, choosedupage.com. Our other program is Sustainable DuPage, and Sustainable DuPage is just as it sounds. It's trying to help businesses become more green, reduce the negative impacts, increase the positive. And how we are doing that is kind of a multifaceted. So we will do green business assessments on site for free. Takes us between 1 to 2 hours. We do have University of Illinois CDAC, Smart Energy Design Assistance Center. They are our consultants that do those assessments. And then there is a report that's released to the business, so it's very customized, so they can use it as roadmap. For those who do not want to do the assessments, we did release a green business checklist, follows the same idea, so they can do their own self-assessment. And then this year, we will release a workbook, sustainable program template, so a business can do more to track and basically have that information. If a customer should ask, what are you doing for sustainability? We do recognize that. We do run educational, just as we're doing today. And so please choosedupage.com to find more information on that. We are releasing case studies from our first group of assessments. We've stripped out names and identifying information, but we feel the information could still be something that you will relate to when reviewing those case studies, and those are being released on our website. So thank you for giving me my couple minutes for my commercial. Now I'm going to turn it over to who's more important. Andrew Simmons with Wavicle Data Solutions will give you the expertise you need.
Thank you, Rita. I appreciate that warm introduction. I don't know about who's more the most important part, but other than that, I appreciate it. Thank you to Choose DuPage. Thank you to Rita for such a warm introduction, invitation, opportunity to speak with you all. I'm going to now present my screen. Hopefully I'm able to do that pretty successfully. We just tried it out, so bear with me for just 1 second while we transition that, and then we'll get started. All right. Can anyone out there just give me a quick thumbs up or validate that y'all can see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Terrific. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. Thanks again. As aforementioned, my name is Andrew Simmons, and I'm a practice lead with Wavicle and Wavicle Data Solutions. Looking forward to a conversation today around the intersection of sustainability, ESG, and data and analytics as a capability, how they can all play together to be mutually beneficial. A little bit of background about me to understand where I'm coming from. I'm a longtime data and analytics guy. Been in this space basically my whole career across a variety of industries and different service offerings. So within the data and analytics space, have worked in strategy and advisory, design, plan, build, run. Grew up as a coder, and have transitioned into various things over that period of time. So seen a lot from a lot of different angles, lived a couple of different booms, bust cycles, but I'm first and foremost a data and analytics practitioner. I would say my view on how to be a effective data and analytics professional is to also have an industry cross section, ESG and sustainability being one. My particular focus is then even further subset within retail and CPG. Which is what I lead at Wavicle. I have been operating in that space for a good bit of that 15 years across, F&B, fashion, grocery, home, convenience, big builds, strategy engagements, you name it. And then particularly in the sustainability and ESG space, something that I'll kind of pull apart for some reasons that I'll mention in just a second, but kind of clubbing them together. For the last 6 or 7 years, I've been engaged with ESG and sustainability in the data and analytics space, and I've been involved with, I would say, three to four, depending on how you count them, large enterprise grade, multi-year implementation, complex implementations over that period of time, all the way basically running the full gamut from inception to ultimately build and delivery and kind of getting into a mature run posture. So I've seen these implementations kind of end to end. Also, I was fortunate enough to get involved as this trend that has a variety of different positive impacts, which we'll talk about in a second, started to kind of touch the data and analytics space. So have been fortunate to see it evolve as well over that period of time. So I hope to bring a perspective that kind of brings all of that together and ultimately does a couple of things. So we built an agenda, around my experience of hearing about three major things out there when it relates to, ESG sustainability. And I'll hopefully provide some answers in the data and analytics piece of that pie or that puzzle. One is a lot of energy and confusion around compliance, particularly with the new SEC rules that have been passed but are held up in judicial review. So a lot of folks asking, what exactly do I have to comply with, particularly if there are multi-jurisdictional regulatory regimes involved in your business, state, local, federal, perhaps multinational. Second is, I've heard this phrase sustainability. I've heard this thing called ESG. Are those the same thing? Are they not? Does it even matter? So that's another question that we hear a lot. And then third is, what we hear from customers a lot is I'm kind of in the middle of ambiguity. I know there's regulations coming. I know perhaps as part of my AOP, my annual plan, my report to the street. If you're a publicly traded company, we have espoused certain goals, some of which perhaps are related to sustainability and ESG, but that's where we're at. We have goals. We may perhaps have some manual efforts against those goals, but I'd really like to improve our maturity and move from kind of this ambiguous space to really making an impact and uplifting some of those goals. And how do I do that? So coalescing around these three questions have hopefully a pretty tight agenda. And just a housekeeping note, the material that I have for you today is not quite an hour, maybe not even quite 40 minutes. So definitely room for question and answers at the end and any kind of questions as we go. But I would say, if you have something critical or something's unclear, feel free to raise your hand, but we do have time, at the end to address most any questions. So that'll be the structure. And also feel free to type it in the chat so don't forget or something like that. So those three topics to address those questions. One is I want to kind of talk about some definitional stuff, just so we have kind of a foundation to build from, hang some stuff on ESG, sustainability, a few other key terms. Second is the role that data and analytics can play in uplifting goals in both or either contexts. And then three, how to get started. So let's get into it. So starting with just a little bit of definitional work. So let's start with sustainability. Uh, you know, I'm sure everybody's reading the slide. That's terrific. I won't read everything on it. I'll just draw your attention to a few things. I'd say the key thing is really this concept of the triple bottom line. So, there's a lot of pressure and energy, multidimensional, on businesses. One we've talked about some compliance, another being market energy in different segments. Customers are increasingly voting with their wallet in terms of preferring sustainable materials, and being willing to pay a premium for those things, and selecting competitors in the same space that have more of a skew towards that than other ones, and that's a little generational. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then thirdly, there's an element of altruism as well. Business folks are increasingly recognizing that they have a responsibility not only to their organization and the economy and the people within that in that organization, but also to the planet, to be a responsible steward of the materials that they consume, their business practices, so that their business and other businesses can enjoy sustainability in the long term. And so overall, we refer to that as the triple bottom line. And there's a relationship that has to exist that we found across those three things. If any one of those kind of gets out of whack, then a practice is not exactly sustainable. So overall, it's a pretty broad concept. As you can see, it seeks to minimize negative impact on the world while continuing to emphasize the positive, but also be self-justifying. And that's where that triple bottom line comes in. To be a practice that can continue and to benefit the people in an organization and the people on the planet on which we live. Ultimately, there has to be a profit incentive. Operating at a loss, although available, in some areas, governmental, perhaps as investment to make a profit. Ultimately, to be a long-term play, there does need to be that kind of mutual benefit. And that's been recognized, I would say, in a different way here in 2024 than we were 4, 5, and 6 years ago, operating more from a compliance pressure and perhaps altruism type of models. So sustainability is a little more broad, again, concerned with that triple bottom line. ESG has emerged as specific ways to capture criteria used to evaluate performance in 3 areas, kind of subsetting sustainability more specifically, and then even an additional level of specificity under each one of those categories. E is environment, S is social, and G is for governance. For those of you that didn't see their Sesame Street this morning, that's always fun to play that game. So, again, I won't read what you can see, but this is not an exhaustive list. Under each one of these categories, there's a variety of things to measure. And data, I would say overall, the role data and analytics can play is to help to understand, measure, understand, and then take action against all of these areas. But just as in, kind of some specific examples of where there's a lot of focus today, energy, particularly under E and GHG, or greenhouse gases, is a big one. You'll certainly recognize some of the stuff under the S, both in the professional sphere and then also, frankly, in the political arena, DEI, other things, and then less controversial issues such as human rights that may apply to your supply chain, looking for conflict-free or child labor-free raw material sourcing, non-controversial, needs to happen. Those type of things. And then governance as well. So, how are we organized to monitor those things? Who's accountable? Who owns these KPIs? Who can actually make decisions? How are we operating ethically and things of that nature? So overall, sustainability and ESG, very closely related. Sustainability is kind of that broader concept that refers to a business practice that can go on in perpetuity as a balance of the triple bottom line, people, profit, and planet. ESG is a more specific subset categorization and subset of those activities with different kind of key performance indicators or KPIs that you can measure as against that progress. And so, why does that matter? Why does that distinction matter? Well, one, I think it's important just to kind of have a conversation about it, know what you're talking about. And I think two, just to spend a little bit of time on it. When you talk about people and planet, part of that triple bottom line, communication matters. And so whether or not you're communicating internally to your organization and your people about your strategic initiatives and what you're deciding to invest in and why, whether you're communicating out to the street or your customer base, as to what you're doing and why, being able to effectively plan and communicate your investments and the impact that you wish to have is important. Language matters in this context. And so it's pretty important to understand, what sustainability is, what ESG is, and how to talk about those things effectively to the various stakeholders that exist internally and your customers and partners as well. So now that we have some definitions under our belt, let's talk about the role that data and analytics particularly can play in helping achieve ESG and sustainability as a broader objective. So I'll start with just some examples here of the, kind of the power of the role that data and analytics can play in this space. Overall, collect, organize, and produce insights into various initiatives. And we just talked and gave some examples about some of them under the E's and the S's and the G's, ultimately driving you towards more sustainable operations. On the right, though, you can see, a couple more specific examples, particularly around transparency and reporting is a big one. Measuring and monitoring operational performance, whether that's the S and G. Risk management, also another large area, particularly, if you're, operating warehouses or if you're operating store locations that have customers and employees, everything from, effective slip and fall mitigations to ladder usage, just, safety, publication and training, things of that nature. If products are in your business model, their development, their sourcing, and participation in what's called the circular economy. And we'll add more on that in just a second, and how you can track and understand that. Benchmarking. So how are you doing compared to your peers? Critical, particularly if you're in a market segment where consumer demand is differentiating by investments in sustainability. And then also the ability to make decisions. So whether you're driving strategy at the business, the data, or the ESG level, and collaboration, internally as well as to your external stakeholder community, data analytics can play a role kind of across all of those pieces. So how would you go about starting to grab hold of some of those benefits? Well, the good news is it's very, very possible. And I won't even call it bad news, but I think sorting through how to get started is oftentimes the hardest part of anything. ESG is not dissimilar. So I'll just share a couple of tips about how to think about how I've successfully helped customers think about over the last 6 to 7 years how to start a journey in this space. I think the first and kind of core thing that I might even say, if you take nothing else away from today's conversation, that I would leave you with is ESG, just like almost any other thing, that a company would try to do, doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists at the intersection of a couple of different pieces. And so, if you were to have you chartered a sustainability office and you hired a chief sustainability officer and you said, go forth and do these things for these reasons, that would be terrific. But some of the first questions that resource might ask is, okay, so great, we have these things on the demand side of the equation, but I kind of need to figure out two other things. And these are the two contexts in which an ESG strategy is really important from a data and analytics point of view. First is, what's my data strategy? What data capabilities do we have here? If you're in an organization with relatively low maturity on the data and analytics spectrum, achieving reporting, insights, analytics, and AI capabilities about all the stuff that we talked about is a bigger, longer journey. However, if you're an organization that already has a decent maturity around data collection, integration, acquisition, management, and reporting, then those are capabilities that can be leveraged. to collect data around E and S and G, and then ultimately report on those things, and then grow from there and do cool stuff such as predictive analytics and AI and also all sorts of interesting things. So that's one big context in which an ESG strategy needs to be considered. What is our broader data strategy and data capabilities? And the other one, kind of off the page, but in kind of the words there in the bottom left, is the business strategy. As a data practitioner, I'll say that's also pretty critical to your data strategy. But from an ESG lens, it's important to understand where the overall organization is going to help set priority for what happens at the ESG level. And the reason why that's critical is ESG, for the most part, obviously not a monolith, but for the most part, it's less. This is my professional opinion. Overall, it's less like a capability, like accounting, finance, or those type of capabilities that are I don't want to say siloed, but are organized and have a reporting structure. And if you want to upgrade your finance capabilities, you go talk to your finance department and you get it done. ESG is more similar, I would say, to goals such as profitability or increased customer satisfaction. Those kind of goals cross all of the capabilities of your business. So talking about the analog of profitability as an example, to increase profitability, gosh, that's obviously a multifactorial picture that's going to be very different for everybody. You can talk cost of goods sold. You can talk about, internal carrying cost of whatever business that you're in, headcount, whatever. You can talk about margin, contribution margin, gross sales margin, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of different pieces. You might talk to your VP of sales about that. You might talk to your supply chain people about that. Ultimately bringing together an integrated holistic strategy that might allow uplift to profitability, as an example. So drawing the line to ESG is very similar. If you think about something like carbon reduction, think of all the pieces of a business that you might have to touch and integrate with in order to get that done. ESG strategy can certainly set the goal, but then you might have to talk to your logistics department to talk about, hey, what kind of vehicles are we using? You might have to talk to, if you're in grocery, your refrigeration team. Hey, what are we using, to refrigerate our product? Just, on down the line. A lot of different VPs, a lot of different verticals if you're, a medium or large size business to touch on, which is why that business strategy is very important. So as an ESG office, needs to be in line with those business priorities so that you have kind of the operating latitude and authority to help make some of those recommendations and bring multiple parts of the business together on goals, because it will take contribution from multiple parts of the business to achieve those things. Just a few more slides, and then we'll pause for questions. Wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the current status of the compliance dimension. So, we talked in an earlier slide about some of the demand pressures on businesses to increase their ESG and sustainability practices. One of which is increased customer demand, which those signals look a little different depending on your market segment. But another big driver is compliance. And I'll just stick to US-based compliance. Obviously in Europe, Asia, elsewhere in North America and Latin America, there are different regulatory regimes, the EU being one that's particularly more advanced and mature, with teeth as an example than the American version, but just sticking with the US for now. As many folks on the call may know, ESG rules were in a commentary period for the Securities and Exchange Commission for, I think, 22 to 24. It didn't set a record, but a lot of comments, a lot of energy around that rulemaking period, 24,000 different comments over a period of 2 years. Ultimately, though, I would say two things happened. One was the rules were passed March 24, so very recently. Second is that what got ultimately passed was, just simply put, less broad and less rigorous than what entered the rulemaking period and the commentary period. Nonetheless, they were adopted by the SEC, which means obviously the public companies needed to disclose certain things. The timeline as of March 24 for those compliance pieces to come into effect was 2025. However, as of the time of this presentation, there's a variety of legal maneuvers, holds, other things that are going on, stays that are examining those rules. I'd say that kind of they're in flux. I'll back up to how we should react to that ambiguity in that flux. But that's kind of the state of play right now. So in terms of what did get passed, though, that's kind of in the judicial system as we speak, three pieces probably have heard of, of some way, shape, or form on these things. You got baseline climate disclosures, including, material climate-related risk strategies, targets, goals, and governance for your organization. Second is your expenditures that are a direct result of, and you can see the three items there: climate-related risk, and then your plans around how to mitigate those. And then thirdly, and probably most expensively for organizations, is for Scope 1 and Scope 2 GHG compliance and tracking, with some third-party attestation and disclosures and all of that good stuff. So those are kind of the big pieces that were in the legislation that's been stayed. Recommendation in general is to assume that something is going to ultimately hit the books and be required in the 2025 to 2027 time range. So particularly for large organizations, the planning has already begun. I've been involved, for the last 6 or 7 years, understanding that this, needs to get done. The multinational companies, the segments of the Fortune 100 that have European operations have typically led the way here, as the regulatory disclosures for their analog to the SEC is already official in a lot of these places, particularly Scope 1 and Scope 2, with actually some Scope 3 going on, and happy to talk about exactly what that means. But that's basically the state of play as it relates to the compliance dimension in this country for ESG regulations. Just a few more things to share. First is just to give you an example of kind of what's out there and where energy is. Pulled this directly off the public internet, link below, which comes from Yahoo Financial. So there's a variety of tools that are already out there to help evaluate companies' ESG stance, because it's such a material part of, I would say, evaluations, public and private companies. So this, the short story on this is, it's already out there. So companies without the internal ability to measure this, rebut, refute, and talk to how companies are being valued and also interpreted by customers, is really kind of where the rubber meets the road. You could go to Yahoo Finance today and look up many companies and what their their quote unquote ESG score is, and then Yahoo provides some transparencies into what the heck they mean by that. But that trend seems to be gaining momentum, not losing. And then again, just one last slide before we wrap up and take any questions that might be out there. Basically, my organization helps kind of from three angles, but I'll pull apart the third one just a little bit. One is data management. So, in your journey in ESG, if you have questions or issues about how to collect, integrate, or harmonize data, me or someone like me can be very helpful in understanding those questions. Second, reporting and analytics. So after you have the data that you think that you need, reports and analytics that align to your ESG and business strategy, bringing those to life, me or someone like me can be very helpful to help put those designs and plans in place. And then lastly, working with auditors for regulatory compliance. So, one thing that I would just kind of mention to this community is the data and analytic boutique shops such as Wavicle typically don't have the ESG compliance auditing function, and Wavicle does not. That's not a space that we participate in. That can basically give you what's called reasonable assurance, for those of you that are familiar with auditing terminology, that as the SEC rules come into formation, that your reporting would meet that level of audit, reasonable assurance that you can meet the disclosure requirements that are forthcoming. But what we do, and what typically is the state of play, is that data and analytics firms do partner with firms that offer that auditing type of capability, excuse me, to build the solution that meets that level. So basically building out your capability that then indeed gets audited and ideally passes said audit. So both sides of that coin are really important, and knowing who to talk to make sure you've got folks on both sides of that coin so that you're well covered and ultimately have confidence that you can meet the regulations that are applicable to you that are coming down the pipe is where you want to be. So that's my presentation for today. Hopefully it was helpful to go a little bit of definitional context as to sustainability, ESG, what the heck are these things? How are they similar, different? Second, why can data and analytics help ESG and sustainability efforts if they're important to your business? And third, how to get started. Talked about the strategic places they're in place, how to think about what's important and how to mobilize. Any further questions? You certainly know where to reach me, my colleagues, or my peers. But that's all we have for today. So I'll pause there to see if there are any questions out there in the audience.
Thank you, Andrew, for that great presentation. Now, if anybody does have a question, please feel free. You can unmute yourself.
Rita, I can't hear you, but it might just be me. I don't see you're on mute.
So
I can hear you just fine, Rita.
Okay, great.
I got the dreaded double mute going on somewhere, perhaps.
So if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute, or if you would like me to handle the question on your behalf, please feel free to put it in the chat. All right, I have a question for you, Andrew. Is there a meaningful difference between data collection in the ESG sense and data acquisition in the data and analytics sense?
I'm sorry to make you repeat yourself, Rita, but I think I was having trouble on my end. I just got your audio.
No problem. I'm going to do it again.
All right, sorry about that, team.
That's okay. Is there a meaningful difference between data collection in the ESG sense and data acquisition in the data and analytics sense?
Yep. Yes and no. I think, that question probably comes from, ESG oriented firms are more kind of on the management consulting or management advisory side of it. We'll talk a lot about data collection in the ESG context. And then data and analytics, technical firms, we'll talk a lot about data acquisition and data integration. Ultimately, functionally, they net out to the same thing, which is how do we get all the data that we need together in one place? Typically, data collection, I would say, infers a little bit more manual stuff. So maybe I'm collecting extracts or spreadsheets or things from various systems and I'm corralling them together. Integration usually implies a little bit more of an automated process. So if these words mean things to folks in the audience, things like, ingestion frameworks and get stuff into a data lake or a data environment that you can do things on top of, such as reporting. But functionally, same thing, grabbing the data, doing stuff with it.
Great. And then I have one more for you.
All right.
What is the maturity of the typical Fortune 500 in this space?
Yeah. Well, I would say, I don't know what kind of, great question. I'm trying to think of what scale to use. I would say low to moderate. So the folks that have led the way, as I mentioned, are the people, are organizations with a European presence that have had to kind of come along a little bit faster overall. I'd say in general, there is probably somewhere between, I'd say most companies have exited the, pure planning and ideation phase and are doing something in this space, if not manual, because they do recognize, as we talked about in one of my slides, that some form of this regulation is coming down the pipe. And so I'd say most folks have done either something manual that they feel can meet the need, as that need emerges here in the medium term, or have started to make initial investments of onboarding those capabilities onto their broader data and analytics teams, and have done kind of that more automated stuff and have just kind of started that journey year to two into it. Yep.
Right. All right, this is your last chance. Anybody have any other questions? Feel free. All right.
I will just assume that everyone will reach out to me one-on-one then, and I'll look forward to talking
And
to you.
you always
on those
got to say
channels.
you did a fantastic job because there was no confusion. So I always go with that too.
Wins on both fronts. Well,
Yeah.
thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you today. Hope that I was able to share something valuable you can take with you. And if you like I said at the end, you know where to find me if you need me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Wavicle Data Solutions, for presenting today. We really appreciate the partnership. And thank you all for attending. As a follow-up, the recording and the presentation will be sent to everyone. Please have a great day.